I often wonder if loneliness has a scent. If it does, I think mine smelled like cold coffee and old paper, the kind that fills an office after everyone else has gone home. I was 38 then. Divorced. No children. A senior administrator in a law firm that barely noticed me except when something went wrong. My life was neat, predictable, and painfully quiet. People say solitude brings peace. But solitude, for me, was like an echo. Everything I said came back hollow. My friends had moved on, marriages, babies, chaos. I told myself I liked being alone, that my independence was freedom. But freedom without warmth feels a lot like exile. That's what I was, an exile in my own life. So when he appeared, I didn't see the danger. I only saw a man who looked at me as if I mattered. His name was Ethan Ward. New to the firm, a consultant brought in to improve efficiency, which was corporate language for cut costs and make people nervous. He was tall, charming, with that kind of confidence that made even his silence sound important. His smile was the kind that made you feel chosen. On his first day, he stopped by my desk. "You must be the one keeping this place from falling apart," he said, leaning slightly over my table. It was a small compliment, but after years of being invisible, it landed like sunlight. That was the beginning, the moment he made me feel seen. I didn't know that was his favorite trick. At first, he was just kind. Coffee breaks turned into lunches. Lunches into late-night conversations after work. He listened when I talked, really listened, about my failed marriage, my self-doubt, my tired dreams. He'd nod and say things like, "You've been carrying everyone else's weight, haven't you?" And I'd feel like he understood the ache I never had words for. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't come wrapped in threats. It comes as comfort. By the time I realized that, I was already falling. It's strange how love, or what we mistake for it, begins quietly. A shared laugh. A glance that lingers too long. A message that lights up your phone just when you've convinced yourself no one's thinking about you. Ethan had a way of turning ordinary moments into something that felt rare. He'd bring me my favorite tea without asking, quote lines from poems I'd mentioned once, and somehow always find the words I didn't know I needed to hear. I started dressing differently for work, softer colors, subtle perfume, a touch of lipstick. I told myself it was for me, but it wasn't. When he walked into the room, I noticed everything. The way he rolled up his sleeves before typing, the way his eyes studied people like a puzzle he'd already solved. He wasn't just charming, he was deliberate. He started spending more time at my desk. "Laura's the only one I trust to get things right," he'd say during meetings, even when others were listening. It felt flattering at first, but I didn't see how he was isolating me, placing me above others, separating me quietly. He'd drop small comments like, "You're wasted here. You deserve better. You should be in my department." And soon, that's where I was. My promotion came out of nowhere. A bigger office. A pay raise. And Ethan, always there to guide me. That was the beginning of his control. He never raised his voice. He never asked directly. He just suggested things, who to trust, who not to. Whose emails to double-check. Before long, I was doing everything through him. When colleagues started avoiding me, I thought they were jealous. They weren't. They were wary. One night after work, he offered me a ride home. It was raining, and I didn't protest. The car was silent except for the wipers brushing against the glass. He reached over, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and whispered, You deserve someone who actually sees you, Laura. It was a dangerous sentence, the kind that sounds like love but means possession. We began seeing each other outside work after that, dinners, weekends, moments that felt stolen from the world. He made me feel alive again, wanted, special. But slowly, I started noticing the shadows between his words. If I didn't answer his calls right away, he'd appear at my apartment, just to make sure you're okay. If I talked to another male colleague, he'd smile too long and ask too many questions. He'd say, "I only worry because I care." And that's how care turns into control, inch by inch, disguised as devotion. One night, I found myself apologizing to him for being distant. He smiled, pulled me close, and said, "I don't want to lose you, Laura. You're the only one I can trust." Those words echoed for days. Trust. Only. They sounded romantic then. Now they sound like a warning I ignored. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about losing yourself, it's a slow fade, not a sudden plunge. Ethan began to reshape my life quietly, like a sculptor carving away at clay until what remained was only his design. He decided what meetings I should attend, what people I should keep an eye on, and what opportunities were beneath me. When I questioned his decisions, he'd smile and say, "I thought you wanted to grow. Don't you trust me?" And of course, I did. That was my mistake. He started planting seeds, small doubts about my coworkers, about my own memory. "Did you really send that report? I told you about that already, you must have forgotten." Sometimes I'd find my documents rearranged, emails missing. I started believing I was slipping. Forgetful. Overworked. And who was there to help me keep track of everything? Ethan. He'd keep my files, rewrite my memos for clarity, and tell our boss my errors were caused by stress. But behind that kindness was something colder, ownership. Then the rumors began. Colleagues whispered that I was only promoted because of him. That he was using me. That I was blind. When I asked Ethan about it, he just smirked. "People can't stand to see you shine," he said. "They'll try to destroy you. But don't worry, I'll protect you." That word again, protect. I didn't see that it meant control. The first real crack came during a company trip. He'd been distant for weeks, moody, distracted. Then I saw a message on his phone when he left it on the table. A woman's name I didn't recognize. Her message was simple. "Same hotel, same time. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach dropped. When I confronted him, he laughed. "You're overreacting. You really think I'd risk everything for someone else?" But something in his eyes told me I wasn't wrong. That night, he didn't speak to me. He just watched me, the kind of stare that makes you question your own reflection. I remember lying awake, thinking about how far I'd fallen, from independence to this, a woman begging for the truth from a man who fed on her insecurities. The following week, a major deal went wrong. Documents went missing. Ethan told the board it was my fault, that I'd approved the wrong figures. He looked genuinely sad when he said it. "I tried to help her," he told them, "but she's been under so much pressure lately." The betrayal didn't even sting right away. It felt like being hollowed out from the inside, a quiet kind of pain that doesn't scream, it just echoes. When the meeting ended, he came to my office and closed the door. "You made me do that," he said softly. "If you just trusted me, none of this would have happened." That's when I realized, he wasn't protecting me. He was erasing me. I left the company a month later. Resigned. Disgraced. Confused. He didn't call. Didn't check on me. It was as if I'd never existed. And for a while, I wondered if that was his final victory, to make me disappear not just from the office, but from myself. But what he didn't know was that disappearing sometimes gives you clarity. It forces you to face what you've become, and what you've allowed. For months after leaving the firm, I lived in a kind of fog. Every morning I woke up late, made coffee I rarely drank, and stared at my phone like it might explain what had happened. How had I gone from a confident professional to a woman afraid of her own thoughts? I replayed everything. Every smile. Every word. Every subtle moment when Ethan had twisted truth into confusion and concern into control. It was like realizing you'd been speaking a language you never understood, one he'd invented just to keep you quiet. The real breaking point came unexpectedly. One evening, I ran into Clara, an old colleague I hadn't seen since I left the firm. She hesitated before greeting me, like she wasn't sure I'd want to talk. But she sat down anyway, ordered tea, and said softly, "Laura. I'm sorry." We all knew what he was doing. My hands froze around my cup. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "Ethan. He used everyone. He made us think you were unstable. He told management you'd been fabricating data, leaking information. After you left, he took your position. And 2 months later, he did the same thing to someone else." The room blurred. I could barely breathe. All that time I thought I was losing my mind. It was him. All of it. The gaslighting, the lies, the silent blame. Clara reached for my hand. "You didn't deserve any of that." Something inside me cracked open then, not just pain, but recognition. I had loved a man who didn't exist. He'd built himself from my weaknesses, mirrored my dreams, and fed off my loneliness until I mistook control for care. That night, I went home and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside were the gifts he'd given me, a silver watch, a notebook, a small photo we once took by the sea. I laid them out on the table and studied them like evidence. Every item had once meant something tender. Now they were just pieces of a story I no longer believed in. I remember whispering to myself, "You loved a storm and expected sunlight." That was the night I stopped asking why he did it and started asking why I stayed. It wasn't weakness. It was hunger, for attention, for belonging, for someone to look at me and say, "You're enough." But the truth is, if you need someone else to tell you that, you're already in danger. The next morning, I went to the office one last time. Not to confront him, he wasn't worth that. I just wanted to see the place that had once held both my dreams and my downfall. Ethan saw me from across the hall. His surprise was real, but his confidence never wavered. He walked over slowly, smiling like a man who still believed he owned the room. "Laura," he said. "You look, well." I met his gaze and for the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the man I'd loved, but as the mirror of my own lost self. He wasn't powerful. He was hollow. A man who needed to destroy others just to feel alive. "I came to thank you," I said quietly. His smirk faltered. "For what?" "For teaching me that some love isn't meant to be survived, it's meant to be escaped." I left before he could answer. The air outside was cold, but it felt clean. Years have passed now. Sometimes I still wake up expecting the sound of his voice, that low, steady tone that once felt like safety. Then the silence reminds me, I am free. Freedom isn't as light as I once imagined. It's heavier, quieter. It comes with nights when guilt lingers like perfume you can't wash off. Guilt for staying. Guilt for loving. Guilt for surviving. I'm 73 now. My hands shake when I write, but I still write every day. Not because I want to relive the past, but because I need to remember it truthfully, without the filter of love or fear. When I look at my reflection, I see a woman who lived through both tenderness and terror. A woman who built her own cage and then found the strength to tear it down. I never married again. I never trusted easily. But I learned something more valuable than companionship. I learned how to belong to myself. There's a kind of peace that comes from understanding that not every wound should be closed quickly. Some should stay open long enough to remind you what you survived. Sometimes I sit by my window, watching the sun dip into the horizon, and I think about him, Ethan. I wonder if he ever changed, if he ever felt remorse, if he ever looked back. But then I remind myself, it doesn't matter. He was a chapter, not the story. A few months ago, I received a letter. It was from a young woman named Grace, a journalist writing about workplace manipulation and abuse of power. She'd heard whispers of my story from someone who once worked at the firm. Her words were kind. I want to tell stories like yours so others don't have to live them. For a long time, I didn't know how to respond. Then one night, I sat at my desk, opened a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote. Dear Grace. Tell them I wasn't stupid. I was human, hopeful, trusting, lonely. Tell them that love can be both poison and medicine, depending on who pours the cup. And tell them that leaving isn't weakness. It's the beginning of remembering who you were before someone convinced you otherwise. I sealed the letter and sent it. It felt like releasing the last ghost. Yesterday, I found that old photo again, the one Ethan and I took by the sea. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pain. Just a quiet sadness, the kind that hums like an old song you once loved but no longer need to play. I tore the picture in half. Not out of rage, but out of peace. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about erasing the past. It's about setting it down and walking away. As the evening light falls across my desk, I smile faintly. If I could speak to the young woman I once was, the one who mistook manipulation for passion, I'd hold her hands and whisper. You don't have to be loved to have worth. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you never have to lose yourself to prove you're loyal. Then I'd tell her what I tell myself now every night before sleep. You survived. That's enough.